let's have a little chit chat about how to plan out a more advanced Intarsia knitting project. So in front of me here I have a few things. You'll notice none of them is yarn. That's because for Intarsia knitting, one of the first steps that you should take, unless you want to play it real fast and loose, which is totally fine, it's often what I do, is you start out with an Intarsia knitting pattern, knitting chart, that looks like this. And for the sake of demonstration, we're just going to assume this is stockinette stitch worked flat because that's the easiest way to explain Intarsia, and it's often how you'll find Intarsia knitting. So we need to figure out how to get our chart, taking a look at just a plain chart with no other stitch instructions at all, how to go from that to a finished knitted product successfully. And since this is Intarsia we're talking about, we are also talking about tail management. If you're brand new to Intarsia knitting, I am going to direct you to some of my more basic tutorials on how to do basic Intarsia, how to estimate tails, how to manage tails, etc. But this video is for somebody who's a little more advanced, who wants to answer the question, well, what happens when I need 3 different chunks of one color, for instance, of yarn at the same time? Like, how do I get myself ready for that before I reach that row in my knitting and then have to cut yarn and end up with more tail ends to weave in than I would have to anyway? And the way to avoid that is planning. So for the sake of demonstration here, we've got this little chart that I drew by hand, obviously, and it is 20 stitches wide by 15 rows long. And again, this is worked flat and in stockinette. So right here, row 1 and all odd numbered rows are right side rows, so the chart will be read right to left. And then for wrong side rows, which are even numbered rows in this chart, they are read left to right. And I'm using a red marker because we're going to take this chart from this to something like this in an effort to plan out what we need to do for this knitting project, okay? So what we've got to do is basically mentally knit through the pattern, which is easy in a swatch that's only 15 rows. So what we've got to do is take a look right away at row 1. So we've got row 1 right here, and we know we're working right to left. So we need to pretend that we've cast on our knitting and we're just pretending in our mind, we're envisioning ourselves working through this pattern. So we know we'd be knitting in this direction, and then we turn to the wrong side and knit this direction, and turn to the right side and knit this direction, turn to the wrong side and knit to this direction until, whoop, hold the phone. I didn't mean to drop my needle so dramatically, but we know that row 4, which I'm going to mark off with some dotted lines here, we know that row 4 is where we first need to have a plan, okay? Then we're going to keep mentally knitting through our row. So we know here there's going to be another color to worry about, and officially there's going to be 2 separate lengths of our main white color to figure out what to do with as well. So we're going to keep pretending to knit through our row. So we know we're going to be working with our first length of our main color here, a length of our contrasting blue color, and then a second length of white. So we know already there's going to be at least 2 lengths of white. And we can even note that over here. Now we keep imagining our knitting. So row 5, we know we can use the same tail management strategy we come up with starting in row 4. And there's row 6 is the same, row 7's the same, and then row 8 right there. We've got a new buddy to consider in the mix. So what we've got to do here for row 8, which is another row where another end is introduced, I'm going to mark here just for myself where another tail, on what row another tail is going to be added. And then we keep going. So row 8, we know there's going to be, somehow we're going to figure out how to do 3 separate lengths of white and 2 lengths of blue. Okay, so and then we can keep looking through here, and we can see there's row 10, row 11 is where that section of white finishes off. And we can also mark between 11 and 12 that there will be a change in our tails. All right. So now we've got to do a little bit of math. So what we've got to do next is take a look at what's happening here. So we knew that we needed at least 2 balls of white for when we got to this section starting in row 4, and now in row 8, we know at some point at least, even for just a few rows, we're going to need a 3rd ball of white. And then for blue, we're going to need at least 2 balls. I should have not gone with the color blue, but blue is a color, and we're talking about yarn balls, so we'll have to deal with it. So next we've got to decide how our pattern is going to break down. You can see here in my first swipe through the pattern that I ended up going back and doing math a couple of times, but to save you guys any confusion, I will connect those dots for you. So what we've got to do is, again, now that we know where to look for changes and how many balls of yarn we're planning for, or tails of yarn we're planning for, we've got to actually figure out which ball starts where and whether or not we're going to need to estimate a shorter tail length for that ball, okay? So for ball 1 of the main color, white, we know it's going to start right here. So it's going to start at row 1, stitch 1. So I'm going to write that down. Ball 1 is row 1, stitch 1. And we know that it's going to be worked all the way back and forth. And then we know that it's going to be on this side in row 4 because we're coming from this direction, from the wrong side. And so we know that that first ball of white will be continued to work back and forth all the way over there. So there's no tail. So I'm going to make a note of that as well. No tail. Okay, ball number 1 of the main color has been figured out. Next we know, because we came to here, that is where ball 1 of blue will start, and that is row 4, stitch 9. So I'm going to write down row 4, stitch 9. And then we know that this one, because it's starting in a wrong side row, so we're working left to right for that first stitch. So we know we're going to go like this with our knitting on our blue color, and cool. So this first tail of blue will start here, and it will serve us all the way to the end of our chart. So we know that it starts at row 4, stitch 9, but no tail is needed again. There we go. Now continuing on to our next ball. So that will be ball 2 of our white color. So we know that that will start right here, right after this first stitch of blue. So that will start at row 4, stitch 10, because the blue started at row 4, stitch 9. You can also count. And please note that when you say the stitch number, for wrong side rows, they're going this way, and for right side rows, they're going this way, okay? So that is ball number 2 of white. And so now we can just follow the tail trail of where white would be worked. So we start it here, and we know we work back and forth. And interesting. So so when we hit row 8 with that second ball of white that starts here, we know that since it's a wrong side row, we're going to be working it in this direction and back and forth. So this section of white, ball 2 of white, will be this block of stitches and this block of stitches. So we can count those up. I've already counted them, so we know that this section is 13 stitches and this section is 30 stitches. Plus 13, because these get worked together from that second ball, we know we're going to need a 43 stitch tail. All right. Cool. That's like the key concept of this, is knowing, doing your imaginating back and forth and knowing what sections go together to estimate your tail, all right? So that was ball 2 of white. So what is the next color that we come to that involves an end? So we know what that'll be in row 8 because we work back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is connected to here. So right here in row 8, that is where ball 2 of blue is added. So that's row 8, stitch 16. Okay, now, just like before, we've got to imagine the trail of the blue tail. So we're starting on a wrong side row with this blue, so we work this direction, this direction, this direction, this direction. And then we know from already estimating tail 1, that is all we'll need to work for that second ball of blue. I've already counted this ahead of time and I know it's 12 stitches. So we know that we will need a tail of 12 stitches for the second ball of blue. Now we're almost out of the woods. We are going to calculate our last tail. So we knew that white was this section for the first ball and that this was the second ball. But then because of where this second ball of blue is added, that's where we need to add the third ball of white. So that is row 8, stitch, what is that, 17? Yeah. And then we know that we just have to follow the path of this ball, which would be wrong side, right side, wrong side, right side, wrong side. So that section needs its own tail. Also, by coincidence, is 12 stitches. So that is a 12 stitch tail. And there you go. The entire chart with a very specific, planned out, mathed out plan is there for you. If it helps you to kind of mark off where your tails go, you can do that. So we know that that's ball 1 of white. We know that this is ball 2 of white, and that's ball 3, right? And then we know that that's ball 2 of blue, and that this whole section is ball 1 of blue. I recommend, if you want to scribble all over this like I did, you can print out your chart and draw right on it. But it is a little bit hard to work with when you scribble all over your chart like this, so just keep that in mind and take that into account as you plan your approach to a little bit more advanced Intarsia knitting.